Very good. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. You're going to have to deal with my incessant enthusiasm this morning. I also grew up in the church, so I need that feedback, whenever we speak. But it is really awesome to be with you on this morning. As Brenton mentioned, good morning. My name is Dr. Tamara Brownlee, and I serve as the Chief Health Officer at Accenture. And I also have the pleasure of serving on the board of the Financial Health Network. So I am wearing both a hat of being an enthusiast and an advocate for the work, but also as a learner as well, like many of you in the audience today. So thank you in advance for your attention. At Accenture, my work is really centered on enabling all of our people across the globe to live healthy and well, and really diving into the dimensions of health being, the mental and emotional, financial, and physical. So this is really on brand, this whole entire time that we're here together. Without mention, the past 2.5 years have really been cataclysmic, I will say, for all of us, and our lives have been changed in countless ways that I don't need to re-enumerate this morning, but in particular, in thinking about predating the pandemic, people were struggling with their mental health, they were struggling with the sense of financial security and stability, then there's the physical challenge that happened, and then the racial injustice on display. It was a lot, and compounding all of that, there were a lot of proposals of solutions, to come through. And so our ability to really think and talk about then what our expectations are coming out of that period is really what we're going to be able to focus on and talk about this morning. We heard from Jennifer yesterday, and I'm just going to elevate some of these statistics because it hit me as I was listening, that according to the most recent Pulse data, 39% of white respondents were considered financially healthy, with only 24% of Latina and 14% of Black respondents. And then looking across gender lines, we see that 40% of male respondents were financially healthy, while only 23% of those who identify as female would consider themselves financially healthy. Also interesting is that 80% of U.S. employees believe that addressing racial injustice and equity is a central responsibility of the CEO and management in our corporations. So what then? I think what started as a noble response has now then become a strategic plan, within our company and the department. It's taking root across all our disciplines. And now we need to really hold to account what's next, right? And how is that penetrating even further? So, without further ado, joining me today to discuss this movement towards greater equity and how it's increased, and in some ways, really creating new efforts towards improving financial health outcomes, are my wonderful new friends and fellow panelists. First, Sarah Kay, Vice President of Inclusive Solutions at Prudential Financial. Welcome, Sarah. Absolutely. We have Lisa Frizon, Head of Financial Inclusion and Racial Equity at Citi. I love the acronym FIRE. She's the head of FIRE at Citi. Let's give her a round of applause. And then finally, Cy Richardson, who's Senior Vice President of Programs at the National Urban League, and he's amazing. So look forward to listening for him as well. So let's get started in our time. I'd like to start the conversation directed at Sarah and Lisa to really talk a little bit more about the role of the private sector as actor and employer in advancing equity and financial health. So, really touching about how the role has evolved and what are some of the biggest lessons learned. So, Sarah, maybe we'll start with you. And we know that Prudential's really deepened some efforts here, directing resources and the like for its people, its business and society, as you turned it. Can you really share more about those commitments and its evolution so far and how the layers are connected?
Yes, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. I think it's also important just to remember, I think with all of our institutions, that we've been around for a long time. Prudential is just approaching its 150th anniversary in a couple of years, and we were founded on the premise that financial security should be accessible to all. And so our first product was burial insurance because he saw that working class families didn't have the financial means to bury their loved ones. And so burial insurance at the time, it cost as little as 5 to 10 cents a week. And we've continued to build on that DNA of the company, that financial security, financial equity should be achieved by all, and that shouldn't be something for one class versus another. And so, our long history of the work that we've been doing, and now our vision statement is to expand access to investment, retirement, and insurance, is really rooted in how do we make sure that we're closing the financial divide and also the racial wealth gap. And so 2 years ago, after the murder of George Floyd, we made these 9 racial equity commitments that we're focused on, as Dr. Tam mentioned, on our people, business, and society. And so on the people side, it's really making sure that we are recruiting, retaining, developing, promoting people of color, that we're really looking at the advancement, particularly of Black and Hispanic employees within our company. And that's really important, not just for the pipeline of talent that's coming in, but it's because those are the people who are going to be designing and delivering our products. And so we really want to make sure that we're having the representation at all levels as people are thinking about the products that can meet the financial needs of our customers. On the business side of things, it's looking at our own products and services. Are they culturally relevant? Are they inclusive? Are they actually meeting the needs of diverse customers? And really making sure that we're tapping into community partners and really helping to bring in those insights and expertise and bridging what we call shared value around bringing nonprofits with our for-profit businesses to think about the different types of solutions and services that we can provide. And then finally, on the society side of things, since 1978, we've given over $1 billion in grants and impact investments around these kind of issue areas, and 470 million of that has gone to advance racial equity and justice. Obviously, the core of our business being these financial products, we're looking at how do we build that short-term and long-term financial health for communities. We're working with our external affairs department to think about how can we advocate for policies around police reform, criminal justice reform, voting rights, but particularly around closing the racial wealth gap. And as you all know, that includes so many different components around income levels, wealth building solutions, affordable housing choices, small business ecosystems, and there's so much that we are wrapping together around all of that. And even though there are 3 pillars of work of people, business, and society, they all go hand in hand because the community work that we're doing not only helps build our credibility and trust within the community, some of them will ultimately be our customers, some of them will actually pipeline into jobs at Prudential, and ultimately be making the products that we're putting out into the market.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I just love the integration of those layers, and I really hear the passion and the deep commitment through Prudential and the work that you're leading there. Thank you so much. Lisa, let me turn to you. Citi came out very publicly about its commitment to advancing racial equity. Now, 2 years in, let's talk a little bit more about that impact of the work, especially that which you've been leading and how Citi has really adopted this anti-racist lens.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for being here with us this morning, and really over these couple of days, I think it's really important to be able to bring people together. Let me start off by saying that I'm happy to talk about the Action for Racial Equity. I think it was an important move that Citi made, but I want to make sure that it's clear that this is building on work that Citi has been doing for many, many years as part of our mission as well to enable economic progress. And so the Action for Racial Equity was across 4 key pillars. It's really more affordable access to banking and credit, helping to support home ownership, helping to support entrepreneurs, and also commitments to being an anti-racist organization. And what I appreciate about Citi's approach is that, similar to what you mentioned, that it's really thinking broadly about these big challenges out here and how can Citi bring all of our energy and resources to bear. And why is this important? I read a report that Fortune did that said in the next 30 years, there's going to be the greatest generational wealth transfer that we've ever seen, $30 trillion. And in the same 30 years, the median household Black wealth is going to 0. In the same 30 years, and 20 years after that for Hispanic households. And so if you just sit and let that think in, that's the wrong 0. And so Citi has as one of our ESG commitments, a commitment to 0 racial wealth gap, and our Action for Racial Equity is just another one of the ways that we're building on that. What's important when we really kind of dig into that fourth pillar that I want to lean in on a little bit in terms of being anti-racist, the approach has been, let's embed the work of financial inclusion and racial equity into the business. And we've done that in a couple of ways. One is we launched a diverse financial institutions group that's doing a lot of great work with our MDIs. It goes beyond all the work that we're doing with the equity commitments, but how we're bringing our human capital to bear. We launched a program, an MDI rotational program to help, where we place city employees resident with 3 of the MDIs to really help with their transformation agendas, to help with their digital capabilities, to make sure that they have the level of sustainability that's needed. We also have a racial equity design, digital design and data innovation team that we're really excited about, that's really working across our businesses at Citi to help us think through how do we get further back into the value stream and embed this work. And then the team that I'm on, FIRE, Financial Inclusion and Racial Equity, I'm just super proud of the commitments that Citi has made to embed this work into the business. And we do it, I think we'll talk about this a little bit more, but it is managed and executed with the same rigor and the same intensity as all of our business priorities. And we're doing a lot of work to ensure that we're breaking down some of the systemic barriers and building access through our products and services, which is required, is necessary to really tackle these challenges that our consumers are facing.
Fantastic. I am really struck by that statistic about the wealth gap and really the commitment there. And so thank you. Appreciate your sharing that dialogue with us. Urban League is entering the chat, and I'd love to be able to turn to you, Sai, and you're representing a different sector altogether, albeit complementary to this conversation and demonstrating a long commitment to advancing equity. I'd love to hear from you and really have our audience members hear from you about how the Urban League has really responded to this massive uptick in interest in advancing racial equity, especially in the area of financial health. And how are you thinking about impact and responsibility going forward?
Wow, that's a great question. And I would argue, and I agree, that we're not only kind of complementary, but central to this conversation, and not just in an episodic way. Like, we are in a kind of prolonged moment in this post-George Floyd kind of era where civil rights is, kind of embodied in economic rights and economic empowerment. And so I think we've seen this more as a motion picture evolving over time with textures and boosts and blocks the progress of people of color in this country. I think the temptation to overthink this moment, though, the point around where our North Star resides, it is understanding and narrowing the racial wealth gap. So you have to understand its components, the vectors that kind of drive the systems that hold people back. And I do think I give credit to both of my colleagues here who are trying to reimagine their place as agents within civil society, right? I mean, we all, have a role to play, but I think the obligation is at the highest level for organizations that are intertwined in our daily lives. And so I think I appreciate the mantle has been taken up. Measurement is key, as we talked about, but I think this moment, we have to be clear, self-management and self-regulation, self-governance. Self-governance is part of what it is to be American. That's part of our ethos. But that bleeds in and becomes conflated with self-regulation at times. And so the Urban League plays an interesting role here. We have access to the kind of corporate and governance conversations that are happening in some of these organizations, and interacting with the watchers within these corporations to ensure that they're doing the right thing and staying within their scorecards. But for us, who's watching the watchers, I think, as it were? We have to ensure that it's not just a public relations win to say we've committed these, insane amounts of money in the way that is a kind of above the fold, headline in the news. But the mechanisms, the infrastructure, the details, it's one thing to talk about diversification, but to democratize these spaces permanently and sustainably requires pushing from the inside and out. And the Urban League, I think, plays that dual role. We're very sui generis in that way. We have access to corporate conversations, but we're on the ground. We're evangelists like y'all. I mean, this is what we do and carry this message. And so I think it took me an hour and a little bit to get 5 miles from where I was to here. So my glass is half empty at the moment, to be honest. But I will say,
this is half empty.
but I will say that, we're in a moment, and this could be fraught because we have a lot of consumers who are watching, who are more financially literate and empowered as consumers than ever before, but are, existing on the margins of economic life. And they're looking to the Urban League, to Prudential, to Citi, to be the actors and to be the corporate embodiment of the opportunity to catch up. That's the equity question, not equality,
right.
Equity. And that necessarily requires reimagining who the winners and losers are and how we define that in the short term. That's where the Urban League is proud to be part of that part of the conversation.
100%. Wow, if this is half full, I mean, I have a follow-up question for you. As I remember, we were talking about this in our preparation for this conversation. What about the realization of all the commitments? What have you seen there in pulsing, I guess, people across the nation in terms of that impact?
Well, I think the impact has gotten incredible attention because I think we've seen our largest corporate actors respond to the moment. And quite frankly, those who haven't responded have been called out as well. So I think there's also an infrastructure in this country meeting somewhere else in this, in this world, like, water finding its way through cement. They are trying to reach the same consumers and clients that we're trying to serve responsibly. There are actors pushing and pulling against us in an organized way. And so I'm glad that these folks have stood up, but also in a way that they're saying, look, hold us to account. This is the rubric we're employing to measure our impact. And they're asking the Urban League and others to help them with that messaging. Because it's important. We have to move people to action, to responsible action. And I think that is the next phase we're in now. Okay, how is this on the ground impacting the ability of people to build wealth intergenerationally? That's the North Star. Yeah. You can't just have a public relations win without, contributing to the North Star. So that's kind of where we are.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, yes.
The point about accountability, I think, is one of the most ones that we can talk about in this conversation and as we continue throughout the next couple of days. Citi was one of the first organizations to raise our hand and commit to a racial equity audit. Mm-hmm. And the reason that we did that is we want to understand, how our Action for Racial Equity program, the design, the implementation, and the integration, right? So that we can understand how to, what's working well, where we can scale, and quite frankly, not just we, Citi, but we as a financial services institution, because to your point, the North Star is closing the gap. And that means that we have to think about what are the specific outcomes that we're driving that are changing the lives of people who have traditionally been underserved and really helping them to realize the promise, if you will, of equity.
This is amazing. All of you have mentioned keywords: data, design, measurement, accountability. So let's get into it. I reference this infamous quote. I think that's attributed to Peter Drucker. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? So how then are we actually doing that? What are the proxies of measurement? And I'm interested also from you, Sai, about how the civil sector is really pushing this conversation. So Sarah, I'm going to start with you. And if you don't mind sharing a bit about backing Prudential's tremendous work, what are those KPIs that are aligning with these tremendous commitments going forward?
Yeah, I think we can all agree that measurement and evaluation is challenging, and particularly when we're trying to make large societal issues. The ultimate measurement is if we all close the racial wealth gap. But within the 9 commitments, we made these public commitments because we do know that people should hold us accountable for that, and we've set measurements against that. So with the people side, we set representation goals at all levels, down from manager all the way up to our corporate board of directors. We have one of the most diverse corporate board of directors that has always been to our success in terms of making sure that leadership is representing the people that we are serving as well too. On the business side, on our products and service side, it's really looking at how many customers are we serving and are we actually meeting their needs. So we do a lot of focus groups, surveys, net promoter scores to really understand, are our products actually meeting mass market needs, and are they culturally relevant, inclusive? And we actually have our nonprofit partners who are coming in, including the Financial Health Network and others, who are coming in to give us advice and guidance on how do we measure that, how do we make sure that the language and the design of the products and the delivery is actually appropriate. On the society side, we are working with external measurement evaluation partners like Impact Genome to think about how do we measure our successes in society, but then also looking at what we talked about around that shared value of how do we make sure that we're impacting both the social and business side, and we've been working with FSG on thinking about a measurement framework on that. And then I'll say on the external accountability side, we're currently supporting Just Capital, Policy Link, and FSG on the Corporate Racial Equity Alliance, which is putting out a public measurement framework on how corporations are doing against the racial equity commitments that they made, of which we will be evaluated on ourselves as well too. So we're looking at both internal and external factors on how to best measure our work in this space.
Fantastic. I love that accountability, both looking out in order to improve inward. Lisa, would you like to respond to this as well about what are those KPIs in measuring the commitment?
Yeah, let me start by talking about how we think about it, and it's a lot similar to the things that you described, right? There are a lot of external measures and factors out there, and we participate in many of those. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about how we think about it internally. And the spirit behind it is, are we doing what we said we would do? Are we making impact? And what are the opportunities to improve and drive innovation and scale? And so there are really three ways that we approach this. The first is going back to that accountability, right? So within the U.S. Personal Bank, FIRE, Financial Inclusion and Racial Equity, is one of our 10 execution priorities. What does that mean? It means that it gets measured and reported and looked at the same level and with the same rigor as all of our business priorities within the USPB. And so I think that's really important, that there is senior leadership, engagement, and accountability is in there, it's on the scorecards. The second is that we've set up a steering forum and an advisory committee, and the steering forum is composed of senior leaders within our bank that come together regularly to just make sure we're tracking against all the things that we said that we would do. But it's also a place where we can have those culture shifting conversations on how we need to show up in different ways and making sure that we're really leaning in and pushing forward. So that's one, is accountability. The second is the scorecards and the metrics that we have, and we have a scorecard, again, that is KPIs that look at how we're performing, number one, in launching the initiatives that we said we would launch, but number two, we're looking at how are we serving customers in different ways, which I think you have to have that balance. It's not just about the input and what you put, but really what's the outcomes and the output for customers that we're leaning into. And the third is really a little bit of a different way to think about it, but it's, how are we testing and learning, right, and being able to get to scale? And so we have many pilots that we are launching and just launched. We've just launched a home lending special purpose credit program, which is, in some ways new in the industry, in some ways, and by us doing it, as other financial institutions have done it, it really kind of helps accelerate our collective learning and making sure that we can show up in different ways, as you said, Sai, and make sure that we're addressing the challenges that we need to. So those are just kind of three of the ways that we are thinking about it internally that complement a lot of the external measures that we're seeing.
I like that last point about really being able to test, the opportunity with the pilots, and that is what spurs the innovation. So I really appreciate that point. Sai, bring us in terms of the role of the civil sector, pushing us then to really hold to account what the scorecards, need to look like, and the metrics. What have you heard and seen?
Well, I mean, we have what I would consider to be vast experience with translating the behind-the-curtain conversation into more tactile, relatable, and understandable commitments that consumers can understand, and that can help inform the trajectory of their consumerism and their behavior. And I think that's where we sit at the intersection of, we're Rosetta Stone in many ways, translating these KPIs that may not kind of mean things in the form to consumers, but it's driving a more deeper commitment. I need to say, though, it's one thing to talk about a commitment, which is easy. In fact, many times it's words on a page and doing, old wine in a new bottle, nothing more but repackaging it. We're looking to define those best actors who are compelled to reach and serve people through products, services, and the ethos of welcoming and belonging, not only as consumers, but as you spoke about as employees. Employee retention, employee satisfaction, employee loneliness for people of color in places that are dominated by white males. There are many sectors that are still undemocratic. And so I think, rather than wait for those systems to, right themselves and to assess where they are and self-govern, I think it's incumbent upon us, all of us, we're on the same team on this one, to call out best actors, to be best, right? I think I've heard that before, but be best, right? And again, those that are not sponsors of Emerge, this is the place to be. They should suffer. And I'm putting air quotes around that. But I mean, competition, shouldn't be immune to this conversation. Those who are committed and compelled to serve people and those institutions that serve people should be here.
Yeah.
And those that are not, that should show up in how we talk about their commitment to serving communities of color.
Yeah, absolutely. What engaging, and I like that challenge about the pressure of the competition. Add a little stress to it, and I think out of the stress will come growth, will come innovation, and the like. I want to make sure that I know you all are with us because you're leaning forward in the conversation. But I want to make sure that you're thinking about questions you'd like to ask our panelists. We will have some time for some Q&A, so think about what you might want to ask in this really quest of advancing racial and financial equity in this conversation. We're going to start rounding up our conversation and thinking about the holistic nature at large of financial health equity. And all of you have mentioned this about cross-sector collaboration, how it's necessary, how it's really important. And Sai, I think you've actually talked about this already, but I wonder more specifically about how the Urban League is thinking about partnership with the private sector and what you're valuing from business.
Well, one, we're valuing a transparency, the willingness to show up. I mean, that's more than half of it. I tell my kids that. And, you have to show up with a pencil and paper to be ready to learn. So I think that is part of the ethos here. Because I think some corporations have had some missteps. And I think that kind of maturity is important, embodied by showing up in places where the conversation is not going to be all puppy dogs and ice cream, right? I mean, it's going to be some tough conversations when you talk about race and inclusion and the kind of historical legacy of writing those things. So I give credit where credit is due. Yeah. And so I think that is something to say. But the main argument needs to be those actors in civil society that play a role in our everyday lives in ways that are conscious and subconscious. Are they driving towards the thing that makes us, we all are wearing the same jersey in this conversation. We're on the same team and wanting to bring people in, serve them where they are in languages that they feel comfortable with, sometimes with gender connections they feel comfortable with other kind of community-based connections that make people feel welcomed, wanted, and safe. Yeah. And then can we connect them to products and services that are in their economic and social best interest within the mainstream? I don't think it's anything deeper than that. Honestly, we use a lot of words and concepts, but I think that's the North Star. Can we have everyone fully participate in the mainstream systems of civil society? And in the post-George Floyd moment, the civil rights argument is around economics. Yeah. Economics. And I think that's the front where we're in now.
Yeah, I love that. Lisa, let me allow you to respond with your thoughts about partnership. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more. I think partnerships, in my perspective, it's not competitive, it's imperative, right? We have to bring the best strength that we all have together to solve these critical issues. I mean, things like we have an affordable access banking initiative where we're working with the National Urban League, right? Going into communities and the organizations like yours and others who really have deep roots, are trusted, respected, and bridging, right, the knowledge and that trust with the products and services that we have, and not just relying on having people come to us, right? We have to do that, and we have to continue to do more of that, absolutely.
Absolutely, Sarah, please.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I always say in the financial inclusion space, fintechs and nonprofits, we all work towards the same goals, but oftentimes they don't talk to each other. So it's great through the Financial Health Network, the Financial Solutions Lab has a fintech nonprofit exchange. But even mainstream large corporations now are recognizing the insights and the values and the products and services that our nonprofit partners are providing. Nonprofits are on the ground directly understanding and hearing from their residents about what are the needs and how are the financial challenges either magnified in their communities. And so I think there's this almost like reckoning of large corporations like all of ours really understanding the power of insights and guidance that's coming through on the nonprofit side. So it's really exciting from our side to see some of our business partners really getting excited to work with our nonprofit partners.
Fantastic. I love that so much. Have you enjoyed this conversation? Isn't it great? Oh, man, I wish we had at least 10, 15 more minutes to just talk in that regard. But we did want to reserve some time to hear from you if you had questions. And I am unable to see what that's going to look like, but I'm going to invite people if they do have a question. Are we providing? Oh, yeah, absolutely. I see you here in the second row. Yeah. We have Mike. Hold on a second. I think I see somebody running furiously. There we go. Yeah. Let us know who you are and where you're from.
Sure. My name is Kim Harris. I am a product manager at Santander Bank. This is my first time at Emerge, and it's been awesome so far. It's a great conversation. My question is for any of you. Sarah, you talk about the 9 public commitments. Lisa, you talk about the 3 KPIs. If you could, excuse me, if either of you could go into more detail about measurement, the scorecard, and really ways that you measure when we talk about inclusion and equity. Those are very broad terms, and just kind of curious how your organizations measure those.
I'm going to repeat just the highlights of your question in case everybody wasn't able to hear it. So it really was around the measurement question and the use of KPIs for really tallying and constructing a scorecard for advancing racial equity around the products that they offer. So Sarah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so we're in the process of creating a dashboard that will use both internally and externally, and there's different, I guess, versions of it, you could say. Right now, our corporate board of directors, our ELT, has seen a version of what we're putting together around the people representation, which are more hard, tangible target goals. Our products and services in terms of where we see the increases in terms of diverse consumers coming in, where do we see more favorability, would people recommend us, are they ambassadors for our products and services, and then around the society side, I always say that society sometimes is the most complicated, right, because we're all trying to solve poverty, and how do you talk about that in that kind of form, but really looking at how do we provide both the quantitative and the qualitative data around that. One thing that I didn't get to mention before is we're also looking at how our employees are faring with their financial health as well too. And one of the great things that our HR benefits team has done is really disaggregate the data in terms of usage and value by leveraging, we call them business resource groups, many of you call them employee resource groups, and really better understanding, different diverse employees and what they value most, and making sure that we're providing a comprehensive, equitable workplace benefits.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for your question as well. Other questions? Don't be shy. I see a gentleman right there. Yeah. Why don't you stand up so that they can bring the mic to you? Yep.
A lot of times when people or when corporations are developing products and services to help lift minority, lower and middle income households and things like that, the people or the communities that are trying to be, or that we're trying to reach, get left out of that conversation. How are you guys engaging those communities to make sure that the things that you're doing are actually going to have an impact on, or are going to have the desired impact that you're looking for?
Great question, and I'll repeat. The question was about how are you being inclusive and including the communities that you're looking to impact with the solutions that they have, and then they have room at the table. Lisa, you want to start, and then maybe Sai chime in?
Absolutely. I think it's a great question, and we do it in a variety of ways. One is through, informed through data and research, some of which we talked about today. Citi was a sponsor of the Post report, and that's important to make sure that we're getting the voices in, and through a broad network of organizations that we really have that deep listening is really critical. And then we're doing some work on the inside on our own to really go out into communities and understand more deeply, what the issues are and how can we actually start to begin to design and co-create solutions that are centered on the needs of underserved communities, whether they're diverse communities, low to moderate income, unbanked, underbanked. So I think it's really important to make sure that we're also starting from a place that is deeply informed by and co-created by the audiences that we're looking to serve. And when I say the audiences, it's again the individuals as well as community partners and organizations that help us think through what the needs are.
Fantastic.
If I could just as a coda to that, I think one of the things we're trying to press corporations to consider is the degree that they're building the capacity of minority-led, minority-serving institutions.
Yes.
I think that the plight of the institutional infrastructure, the ecosystem of the nonprofit and the CDCs, that's a story that's not really told with enough nuance and with enough power. So again, an emerging CDFI industry, that can be a portal, an accelerator to reaching these nooks and crannies where people are that may not have a nonprofit institutional, actor proximate to them. So I think it's looking at ways to, cut down space, reimagine geography, and I think there are intermediaries that can help that. And I think many of you obviously are doing that, but I think that's something we can measure.
Yeah, lots of work with CDFIs and MDFIs and community organizations that are deep in the work, and we really see these as partnerships.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for your question as well. Do we have one more? Yes, ma'am. I see you.
Hello, my name is Haley Carlotto. I'm from Mass Mutual, and I'm a strategy lead in Mass Markets. For the past 2 years, I've also been representing Mass Mutual through a business coalition called CEO Action for Racial Equity, which I think some other organizations in this room are also a part of, and we're specifically focused on the Black community. And my question is around building trust between the Black community and financial institutions, because financial institutions lost a lot of trust within the Black community over past decades with policies like redlining and the like. And I'm curious for our panelists, what are some strategies or approaches that you're implementing to help build trust and bridge that trust again within the Black community?
Great question. Question is about building trust that has been lost between communities that have been made marginalized in a financial institution. And maybe I'll have an opportunity for all of you to respond, and then we'll wrap up. Sarah, why don't you start?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that we are front hand tackling right now. I have one of my colleagues here who's today leading one of our initiatives that's specifically looking at Black wealth building opportunities. And we're doing that by really doing focus groups, better understanding. One of the insights that just came out from one of our focus groups recently that I keep repeating to everybody is they told us these were Black men that we wanted to make sure that they have the opportunity to gain life insurance because we believe that's a pathway for intergenerational wealth. They said, America doesn't trust Black Americans, and Black Americans don't trust America, and financial institutions are synonymous with America. And so, those are the things that we need to figure out on how do we build that trust and credibility. And one of it is really working with partners who do have that trust and credibility, because we know we cannot solve all these issues. We know that we don't have all of these insights. And so it's really, truly understanding what's at the core of it, who are the messengers, because we do believe our products and services do help build wealth, build intergenerational wealth, and how do we gain that trust from the community around these issue areas. But it's also making sure that our messaging, the product design, the delivery of all of that is inclusive, and we're getting that feedback directly from our customers.
Yep. I would just add that I talked about our home lending program, and one of the things that we've done is hire a group of community loan officers. These are folks who are deeply entrenched in the communities. They know the diverse realtor organizations. They know the organizations like National Urban League and other organizations where there is that trust. In the community, more than anything, will go to them. Like, these are the people that people go to when they have questions. And so we've embedded them as part of our go-to-market strategy, as part of our kind of distribution and outreach strategy, to make sure that we're, I would say, using these types of relationships to build that bridge of trust.
I think it's a fantastic question. I think it's an existential one because I think, brand, kind of positioning is central to this society. But I think I turn on its end in many ways. I don't think there can be a cost for us to carry that brand reclamation for some of our, less than compelled corporate partners. Again, it shouldn't be left to us to clean up bad decisions and bad actors. I think they have to walk the plank on that, and again, suffer in the eyes of the consumer. What I would say is if I can understand and see what you're talking about, if I can help you embody those products and services, I'll stand with you using the trust of my organization if we can affirm those are the right products and services for the needs of the consumer. Where I can't do that, you're alone and you'll have to walk the plank. And again, those folks who are not here, that's the kind of suffering I'm talking about. That makes that brand reclamation far more difficult when you don't have community actors helping bolster that.
As the kids say, we heard a whole word this morning on the subject of advancing racial equity. I'd love to have you join me in thanking our fabulous panelists, Sarah Kay, Lisa Frizon, and Cy Richardson.